Hi, I am Carolyn Friedlander and welcome to week 3 of the Alphabet and Shirts Quilt Along. We're a few weeks in and so I am wondering how things are going with you. Are you still excited about your initial ideas? Have you gotten kind of into the flow? Are you settling into those projects? How is it going? Leave a comment below and let me know how you're doing. For me, this week, I don't know, I'll be honest, I don't think I got as much done as I would have hoped, but that's okay. I am making progress and that's what is important. Little steps add up if you just kind of keep at it. So yeah, let's just hop in and I'll show you what I have been doing over the last week. First thing is last week I made the You Are My Sunshine letters and now I have pieced them. So I've sewn them together and I don't know, they're really cute. I ended up changing the way that the lines work. So I played around with how I wanted the words spaced out. I added little solid blocks in between the different words to give space. And I think probably last week what I would have thought to do for these blocks would be to have fabric kind of all the way around it, but I decided after putting them together that this was good. I kind of like having it at this state and I can add fabric around the edges to kind of frame it out better later as I kind of decide more about what I want to do with it. So yeah, it's really cute. It's super scrappy. In fact, this one is made with the smallest letters for my alphabet pattern and I thought it'd be fun to also share my name tag that I made. This was for QuiltCon, and it's funny, when I kind of brought the two together, they really have a very similar look and feel, color vibe. I mean, I used scraps. I used a lot of the same scraps. I used a lot of my favorite colors, so it makes sense that they kind of jive. And they're both just scrappy, so they're not, with some of the other alphabet projects I made, there's more cohesion between the letters where the letters are all the same color, or maybe the background's the same. With both of these, I just really like how scrappy they are and they were fun to piece and yeah. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of some technical tips for working with the smallest letters a little bit later, but I just wanted to show you that now. I've also been sewing along on my shirt blocks, so I've got more added here behind me. I'm starting to try to think about what I don't know. So this top part, those are all the blocks that I made last year. And these rows are the ones that I'm adding this year. And I'm gonna continue making shirts, so I'm gonna really fill up that space. So I might decide to move everything up a little bit, or I might decide to move things out. I don't know, I'm not sure. It's been nice to have that project hanging behind my sewing machine for a few different reasons. One, I can see what I did last year, which has been really helpful, but then it's also just been fun to look at and think about what I want it to become. Now that I'm adding more blocks to it, I don't know if I'll end up just sewing all of these together and trying to finish it out, or maybe, I don't know. I don't know if I should leave an ongoing work in progress, but I don't know. That's how things go. So we'll see. I did make a shirt for today, which is this one. It's so cute. I don't know. I really like these colors together. I like kind of the natural color here with the sharp black and white, and then this pickle color. I just think it's a really pretty palette. So I don't know. That might be inspiring for something. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see. I don't need to run away with things, but I think this would be a really pretty alphabet palette, or I was already thinking about some other projects. This could be a really pretty color palette so that's pretty inspiring. As for the shirt that I am wearing, this is the Cali shirt. You can also make a dress, Black by Closet Core. And I made this a few years ago out of my gleamed fabric. I love this pattern. I love this shirt. And I don't know, it's fun to wear. And I was a little surprised when I looked at my blocks from last year that it's not one that got worn last year. So I'm excited to have it represented this year. So that's good. Let's see, what else do I have going on this week? Okay, so that's really kind of what I've been doing. I've been project jumping a little bit, which I think is good. That's keeping me, it's keeping me engaged, having the ability to jump around on a couple of different things. But one thing moving into the next week is that I want to make sure to kind of keep myself on track too. So one of my main goals for this quilt along is to finish a twin-sized alphabet quilt that I'm going to give to my niece. The blocks are done, they're sewn together. I just need to add borders. So if I could get those borders on before our next little meetup, that's a big goal for me. And I think why I am kind of procrastinating on that, if I'm being honest, is just because the borders are really big. This one has very spacious borders, and they're just going to be kind of a pain to cut. I think that that's why I don't know which parts of the process you like more than others, and this one just seems to be one that I am not as, that's definitely my holdup, is cutting those big borders. I just need to bite the bullet and do it because I need to clear off my cutting table. I need to grab the fabric. It's going to take some special measuring and cutting, and then sewing it on I don't think will be a big deal. It's really more just, well, having to clear my cutting table, that's always a challenge because it gets really full. But anyway, I am saying that now, that's a goal. That's what I'm definitely gonna have done by next week. So use me as an example, whatever you might be hung up on, make sure to give yourself some goals, give yourself some hard goals to at least start it and make a plan for getting that finished. So that's something to think about this week. I also wanted to share some tips for sewing with the very small letters. So like the letters for my name tag here, and then I also use the smallest letters for my "You Are My Sunshine." So in the alphabet pattern, there are 3 different letter sizes: 2.5 inches tall, 5 inches tall, and 10 inches tall. We're talking about the 2.5 inch tall letters today. And they are adorable. They are so cute. They don't take very much fabric at all to piece. So for those reasons, it can be really enticing to sew those. They're very satisfying. But they can also be, I think, the trickiest in some ways just because they end up being pretty bulky. It's a lot of different seams coming together. There are a lot of different parts. Actually, I should just show you the back. You can see how kind of my pressing is clean, but it's not consistent. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I just wanted to acknowledge that the smallest letters are enticing, but they can also be a bit tricky just because of the bulk. So I wanted to share some tips on how to manage that bulk this week. So the first thing is to use a smaller stitch length. I pretty much always piece with a 1.5 millimeter stitch length, especially when I'm foundation paper piecing. That perforates the paper more, but it also just makes for such a secure seam. And so with these small pieces, it's just really nice to have that tight seam because it's a lot of things coming together. When you go to press it, you want to get a good press. You want to really make sure that those seams are going to hold up to taking the paper out, all of those different steps. So make sure to use a really small stitch length to give you a very secure seam. Next thing is pressing. I love ironing. I don't know where you stand on that whole thing, but ironing and a good press is important all of the time, but especially when it comes to something that's super bulky. You really want to manage your bulk. So from the get-go, when you're piecing your blocks, you really want a good press. I love using a wool pressing mat. I have a big one on my ironing board here, which I'm sitting next to. You can't see that, but I have a bunch of little ones too. I don't know, a few years ago, I feel like these things started coming out, and I have several. Like I said, I have, I think it's a 1/4 inch thick one that like lays over my entire ironing board. But then I also have these smaller ones that I can take around and use. And what's really nice about using the wool pressing mat is that it absorbs a lot of that heat. It holds a lot of the heat from the iron. So then you get a good press from the bottom and a good press from you get heat from the bottom in that pressing mat, and then you get the iron on top, and it just really makes such a big difference. I think that, even if you don't have a great iron, even with just a basic iron, having that wool cutting mat will improve the situation so much to where you know, you can get away with having a not super great iron. So that wool pressing mat. Also, I do like using a good iron. And steam. I know using steam with foundation paper piecing is a little bit controversial. People either love it or hate it. I am definitely in the love it category. But you've got to be careful with how you use it. I mean, you definitely want to make sure you're using an iron that is not leaking or anything to where it's going to mess up your fabric or mess up your paper. You don't want to wet the paper at all. And whenever I'm pressing, I am making sure to iron the fabric more than I'm ironing the paper. So, you know, if you're like piecing a block, I don't really have an example here. I don't have an in progress example, but you know, as you're piecing together your different sections, you have your fabric, you have your paper. I'm pressing as much of the fabric as possible and as little of the paper, meaning the fabric will be on top of the paper. And I think that helps. I don't usually have any problem with the steam wetting the paper or making it difficult. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of using steam in foundation paper piecing. I just think it makes you get a much better press. So anyway, especially with these letters, you want to make sure you've got a good iron. And I know that in theory, as far as like pressing direction on the seams, in theory, well, first of all, I should say with foundation paper piecing, you can't really control the direction that you're pressing your seams. With foundation paper piecing, there's an order to how you're piecing, and the seams end up getting pieced in that direction. So that's that. But when you're sewing two blocks together, you do have control over how those are being sewn together. And in an ideal world, pressing your seams open is going to be a nice flat finish. So, you know, especially if you're working with something bulky, that's going to be the best way to manage that bulk, is to even it out, evenly distribute where that bulk is going. But in reality, that's not always the best. It doesn't always work out that well. So we'll just turn mine around and you'll see. You know, I pressed things open where I could. In other blocks, and some of these that have two different templates, it might be easier just to press those in one direction or the other, kind of away from those sections. But then when you're joining here, see, I joined these two rows. There's no sashing between these blocks. You get a lot of bulk. And so I tried to press things open, but in some places it's just really hard. You've got a lot of bulk and it may not want to do that. So I just kind of let it do its thing. I'd start on the back and kind of press it open as much as possible. You know, this seam really wanted to go down, so I let it. And then when I turned it over and gave it a good press here, I just kind of really worked in those seams the way that they wanted to go. So, you know, I pressed from the top or from the back to get things open where they could. And then the things that really didn't want to open, that's fine. I turned it over and then used my iron to just get it nice and flat. And when I'm pressing from the top like that, I am pressing. So I'm not applying pressure and then moving the iron. I am applying pressure and leaving that iron flat. And then when I go to move to another section, pick it up, put it down. And that ensures that you're not like stretching your blocks. So from the back, it might look a little crazy, but from the front, it is, I don't know. I feel like the bulk has been managed as best as possible. Like I said, it's not the most ideal situation just because with all of these little pieces, you've got so many different seam allowances coming together in a very small area. So one way to manage this a little bit better, if you didn't want to have to deal with as much bulk, is that you could add little borders, so pieces of fabric between your rows of letters. I didn't, and that was just a choice I made because I wanted them to be together. But if you were to add a strip of fabric between each of these, like sashing, that would give you space to push, you know, to press your bulk into that sashing. And that would make it a little bit easier. Another thing that you could do is you could remove the paper from your blocks because that'll also reduce the bulk. I don't do that unless so for this one, for these really tiny ones, I left the paper on the blocks, but removed it in the seam allowance when I sewed two letters together. And then once I had this whole row pieced, then I removed the paper just because it was so bulky. And that was helpful. It was definitely helpful. Let's see. Yeah, so you can do that. But I mean, parts of it are just going to be bulky, and the thing is just have patience. Choose your battles. It's like I said, if you want to add the sashing, that helps. But pressing really can be your friend in this situation. So just work through it. It'll work out. The next step would be quilting. So just keep that in mind when you are selecting your quilting design, that you're anticipating there's going to be some bulk there where those blocks are coming together. I think we can take, just looking at my name tag here, and what I didn't quilt this. Well, I didn't put batting in. So I sewed my blocks together, and then I basically just I sewed flat pieces right sides together and flipped it inside out, leaving a little pocket to turn it inside out. And then I just stitched kind of in the ditch, just to kind of hold it in place. It was just going to be a name tag, so it didn't, I could have added batting, but I didn't want to do a lot of quilting. I deliberately chose to not do a lot of sewing on top just because of the bulk. So you can think about that when you are planning your quilting. And you can see here for the name tag, I just put a safety pin here, and that's how I would wear it. But I've been seeing some really cool name tags that you all are posting online, and you're coming up with some very clever ways of finishing it. So one, making a lanyard, which looks great, using selvages, using lanyards from past name tags at shows. Anyway, some really cool, clever ideas. So definitely recommend anyone checking that out. And yeah, that looks good. So yeah, I hope that that's helpful. So now I'm going to move into, I just wanted to mention a couple of notes from you. You can sign up for the quilt along. The link is below. And when you sign up, you can leave a comment about what you're most excited about with the quilt along. It's been a delight reading all of your responses. And in the last couple of videos, I've shared some of them. So I just wanted to continue with that. And so a few of you are trying foundation paper piecing for the first time. I am proud and excited for you, and I want to know how that's going. And then some of you have also mentioned that you are looking to improve your foundation paper piecing skills. And that's just it. There's no way to improve your skills without giving it a shot. So if you are participating in this quilt along and you are sewing a little bit each week, then you are doing the right things. Everything gets easier with practice, and this is a great way to do it. So I'd love to know how you're feeling now that we're a few weeks in. Like I said, leave a comment below. How is that going? And then last, I was going to finish up with some questions from you. I've got 3 questions, and if you want to ask me a question that I can answer in next week's video, there's a link for that below as well. All right, I am new to quilt-alongs. I am looking for the May 8th post. How do I find and see it? I thought this was great to address just because I know that I'm sharing things in different locations. So you might be picking up one thing in one place and not knowing where to find, for example, the blog post in another place. But just to summarize where everything is, you can find blog post on my blog, which can be found at carolynfriedlander.com. And there are links to each of the posts if you just scroll down on my homepage, but then also in the top header on the right, there is a link to the blog. So you can find blog posts there. Of course, I'm posting here on YouTube with all of the links to everything that I'm talking about are in the show notes. So just below the video, you can click in that description where it says show more. There will be links there. And let's see, I'm posting on Instagram. And I'm also kind of sharing everything in my newsletter. So if you would like to get a summary each week of what's been going on, you can subscribe to my newsletter and you'll get the links there. Let's see. Next up, you mentioned you made your blouse and blouse/top. Would you share the info of the pattern you used? It looks like a vintage style. I really like. I love your creativity, your patterns, and the fabrics. They're my go-to for baby quilts. Table runners, and she made her husband a quilt from the architecture collection a while back. Thank you. So nice. So yeah, I think you might be referring to the top that I was wearing in last week's video. Of course, this one I just mentioned is the Callie shirt from Closet Core. Last week I was wearing a top from Named is the pattern company. And so if you go to last week's video, I do link that pattern in the show notes. And otherwise on Instagram, as I'm posting outfits, I am mentioning what that pattern is in the description. So, and I might be tagging the designers. Some of the things are older, and so those patterns may not exist, sadly, and I'll mention that in the post. But otherwise, if I'm able to link whoever the pattern company is, you can always check that out in the description. Okay, last up. Any tips for getting a flat block, especially the 2.5-inch alphabet blocks? Do you trim 1/8 of an inch seam allowance? So this question really did inspire that earlier portion. So I hope that those tips were helpful. But I also wanted to talk about the working with the small blocks, because I was sewing with the small blocks this week. And in sewing with them, it just kind of makes you think about these things. But yes, I wanted to also address in this question about trimming to 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You can totally do that. And that just reduces the bulk that you have. In that case, definitely recommend using that shorter stitch length to make sure that you have a really secure seam, because 1/8 of an inch seam allowance is not a ton of fabric to have. But as long as you have a secure stitch, as long as you have a secure seam, you should be fine. You could also, in that case, you might consider using a polyester thread, a really fine polyester thread. I am always piecing, foundation paper piecing with Aurifil 50 weight, but I know that some people like using some of the Wonderfil, maybe Invisalign, those are the teeth things. Invisifil, I don't know, one of their thinner polyester threads. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but you could definitely look at their website, and I know that they would have some recommendations. So that's something else that you could try. And the reason for considering a polyester thread is just that it's a lot stronger. And when you have such small piecing, and if you're reducing that seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch, you just really want to make sure it's going to hold together. So that'll help you with that. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me this week. I look forward to seeing you next week. Continue posting your projects. You can tag me, that way I can see them. You can also use the hashtag CFAlphabet if you're working on alphabet, and you can use the hashtag CFShirtsOfShirts if you are working on shirts. And look forward to seeing you again next week.